At the company dinner for couples, I felt my heart drop from my chest when, as I turned to get more wine, I saw a scene I never imagined I would witness. My boss was holding my wife's face with an intimacy that I thought was only mine, and without hesitation, he pressed his lips against hers as if they were completely alone in the room. In a matter of seconds, the world seemed to go silent, but the sound of the glass slipping from my hand and shattering on the floor echoed like the official announcement of the end of everything I thought was unshakable. Every pair of eyes in the restaurant turned to me as I walked towards them, my body shaking with a mixture of disbelief and contained anger, and when I got there, just a few inches away from them, I uttered words that came out of my throat. "You have just destroyed everything we have built together. I am disappointed with your attitude," my voice so cold it seemed to have been molded from ice. Without waiting for a reaction, I walked away, ignoring her attempts to hold me by the arm, while whispering, "Love, it's not what you think," and walked out of the restaurant with my mind numb and my eyes burning, fighting not to let the tears reveal the absurd pain that was eating away at me inside. I spent the entire night pacing around the living room, remembering the moments that made our relationship seem unbreakable, the laughter on trips, the late-night conversations, the plans for the future that now seemed like bad jokes, and every time I remembered the kiss I had witnessed, I felt a bitter taste rise in my throat. The anguish was so great that, before sunrise, I printed out the divorce papers, put them in an envelope and sent them to her with a motorcycle courier, making sure she would receive them before she left for work. When the courier confirmed the delivery, I could almost hear, even from a distance, the sound of her world crumbling apart. Because when she opened that letter, everything she thought she had achieved evaporated, and the words printed in formal letters were more cutting than any argument. I was ending our marriage, ending a story that until recently I would have sworn would last forever. It only really sunk in for her when she read those lines. Panic took over, the desperation of someone who finally realized that they had exchanged a lifetime of complicity for a moment of cheap lust. She ran to my old house, found the door locked with new locks, felt the emptiness echoing through the walls and fell to her knees on the porch, screaming my name between sobs that seemed to tear her throat. I turned on my cell phone just to listen to the dozens of voice messages she had left, cries, begs for forgiveness, promises to change, desperate pleas for me to come back. In each message, I heard the genuine pain of someone who only understood the stupidity she had done too late, but also the conviction that was growing stronger in my chest that there was no more space for the two of us. How could I share a bed again with someone who had destroyed me inside? How could I trust again the person who, in the blink of an eye, made everything we had built seem fragile as glass? Still, the mind is cruel. Even after all the anger, every now and then the memory of the good times would surface, like when she hugged me from behind while I made coffee or when she whispered, "I love you," when she woke up, and each memory came like a stab, reopening the wound. But while she was trying to find me, I was already taking the first steps to move on. I organized my move, decided to start over in another city, far from any memories that could drag me into that abyss of pain. And in the midst of this process, I met someone as hurt as I was, someone who had also been betrayed and who understood the intensity of the disappointment I carried. Our conversations lasted until the early hours of the morning, and little by little, the scars stopped hurting so much. During the first few meetings, I still felt uncomfortable holding another hand, but every genuine smile she gave me reminded me that life could be sweet again. Meanwhile, my ex wandered like a ghost around the city, asking acquaintances if they had seen me, calling all our mutual friends, writing letters that I never answered. A part of me wondered if she deserved so much suffering, but another part, colder and more realistic, knew that the choices she made had led her exactly where she was. She started visiting places we used to frequent, as if every corner still held a piece of me. She went to the cafes I loved, sat at the same table where we used to laugh together, but all she found was the uncomfortable silence of someone who is ignored even by the walls. "Please answer me, I need to talk to you," said one of the last voice messages I heard from her before I blocked her number for good. "I messed up, I can't live without you, forgive me," but that voice could no longer arouse compassion, only the certainty that I was free. It was then that I realized that the worst was over. I no longer felt that sharp pain in my chest, only a strange, almost uncomfortable peace, as if I had become someone new, someone who finally understood the value of their own dignity. A few months later, while she was languishing in regret, I found myself smiling again, this time for real, as I drank coffee next to the person who had made me rediscover my zest for life. In her eyes, I saw the same strength that was reborn in me, and each conversation was like a brick built to build a future more solid than anything I thought I would have with my ex. Now, looking back, it's impossible not to think about how everything changed so quickly, from a seemingly ordinary night, to a personal hell, and then to a freedom I never imagined I would find. And yet, there's something that always intrigues me: why would someone who had everything in hand decide to throw it away in exchange for a momentary whim? Did she always know deep down that she wasn't worthy of the love she was receiving? Or did the security I offered make her numb enough to believe that I would never leave her, no matter what she did? The moral of this story is crystal clear and as painful as the sharpest of blades: it is not worth exchanging a relationship built on love, patience and companionship for anything, not even for a supposed desire, not even for an affair. Because, in the end, the one who cheats may even feel in control, but it is the one who is faithful who will have the real chance of being happy again, while the cheater will live chained to the weight of his own choices. But there was still a doubt that kept me awake: why on that particular night, at the couple's dinner, did everything come to light as if it were an inevitable punishment from fate? What could have really made her cross the line of betrayal knowing all that she was risking? Welcome to our channel. We never support any form of cheating here. On the contrary, our fictional stories reveal how infidelity destroys lives, corrodes hearts, and leaves deep scars. Our goal is to show the importance of valuing those who truly love you. Get ready, you're about to hear a shocking story. Good story. Thomas was always known for his easy smile and calm demeanor that conveyed confidence wherever he went. From a young age, he had a serene look in his eyes that contrasted with the restlessness of the corporate world he had chosen to build his career in. Already at university, he stood out for his strategic intelligence and the way he made everyone around him feel heard, characteristics that quickly made him one of the most promising executives in his field. His charisma, however, was not just professional. It was almost impossible not to feel captivated by the way he could turn serious matters into light conversations. It was in this context, during a seminar for young professionals, that he met Laura, a woman who, with just one look, seemed to have the power to destabilize anyone's composure. Laura had long hair that was as black as night, eyes that danced between green and honey depending on the light, and a smile that overflowed with passion and ambition. If Thomas was the balance, she was the fire, and together, they formed a couple that many defined as perfect, as the complicity between them was evident even in small gestures, like the glances exchanged during social gatherings or the subtle touch of hands during quick encounters in the hallway at home. They had recently moved into a gated community of elegant homes, where they planned to begin writing a new chapter in their lives. The neighborhood was leafy and quiet, a true refuge for those who spent their days in noisy and competitive corporate environments. The couple's routine seemed like a modern fairy tale. In the morning, they shared quick coffees between kisses and hurried hugs before each one went to work. At night, they discussed travel dreams, analyzed future projects and made plans for when the children they so longed for would come along. On weekends, it became a tradition for them to wake up late and prepare a hearty breakfast together that filled the table with pancakes, fruit and laughter. In the eyes of anyone who saw them at those moments, the love between them was as solid as concrete, and any idea of breaking up would seem absurd. Their circle of friends reinforced their image as the perfect couple. At their home gatherings, Laura was the tireless hostess, concerned with pleasing everyone, decorating the house with fresh flowers and preparing dishes that drew sincere compliments from guests. Thomas, in turn, took care of the sound environment, always putting together playlists that transformed the atmosphere of the gathering, and talked to each guest as if they were the most important person in the world. In every corner, photos of them adorned the furniture: trips to paradisiacal beaches, spontaneous moments in parks, knowing smiles at romantic dinners. Guests would leave commenting on how impossible it seemed that two such different people could complement each other so harmoniously, with her being the hurricane and him the safe haven. In the workplace, Thomas was known for keeping ethics as his top priority, refusing to take easy shortcuts and preferring to achieve his victories through effort and competence. This earned him the respect of colleagues and subordinates, but also the hidden envy of some who saw him as an obstacle to quick promotions. Laura, on the other hand, despite having started working later than her husband, made up for any delay with fierce determination. Her emotional intelligence caught the attention of her bosses, and many saw her as someone destined to rise quickly in any company. The pressure for results, however, was part of the routine of both of them, who, despite the natural wear and tear of leadership positions, always managed to find strength in each other to move forward. Even with their lives full of commitments and responsibilities, Laura and Thomas never gave up certain rituals that kept the flame between them alive. Once a month, they made a point of choosing a different restaurant to have a reconnection dinner, as they called it. On these nights, they would put away their cell phones, exchange confidences, talk about insecurities, laugh about old memories, and remember the reasons that had brought them together. These moments made Thomas feel invincible and convinced Laura that, despite the stress of everyday life, the love between them was unshakable. The setting chosen for these nights was always special: restaurants with soft lighting, background music, and tables positioned to ensure privacy, elements that created the perfect setting for passionate declarations and promises of the future. Between these meetings, there were the ordinary days, when work weighed heavily on both of their shoulders. Even so, the messages exchanged during work hours were full of affection, inside jokes and spontaneous photos that brought smiles even at the most stressful times. And, when they returned home, the welcome turned into long hugs that conveyed more than words could explain. When one of them arrived late, the anxiety mixed with the expectation of sharing how the day had been, as if any detail, no matter how small, only gained meaning when told to the other. The home they built was decorated with objects that told their story: paintings bought on trips, birthday souvenirs, and little notes hidden among books, ready to surprise whoever found them. In the eyes of their parents and family, the couple was a source of pride, an example of unity and partnership. During visits, Laura made a point of preparing her mother-in-law's favorite recipes, while Thomas was proud to show off the garden that he cared for with dedication to keep it always in bloom. On these occasions, the house would be filled with life and voices that mingled in lively conversations, bringing a cozy atmosphere to the environment that made any visitor want to stay longer. When they sat down to watch old movies cuddling on the couch, they talked about what it would be like when they had children running around the living room, imagining how they could pass on to them the values they considered most important: respect, dialogue, honesty, and the ability to keep the flame of love alive even on the most difficult days. Over time, both began to excel even more in their respective careers, and this brought new responsibilities that made them spend more time away from home. Work trips became more frequent and lonely nights became part of the routine, but even during these moments of distance, they kept their connection alive through video calls that ranged from shared laughter to moments of comfortable silence, when all they had to do was hear each other's breathing to feel that they weren't so far apart after all. When they finally met again, each touch and each kiss seemed to have even more intensity, as if absence had the power to rekindle dormant feelings. These trips home were celebrated with improvised dinners, glasses of wine and long conversations that lasted until the early hours of the morning. In the environment in which they lived, the neighbors saw Thomas and Laura as the couple who had it all: success, complicity, affection, and plans that seemed unbeatable. Many commented on how rare it was to find two adults who, even after years of relationship, continued to treat each other with the same enthusiasm as in the beginning, exchanging sparkling glances, surprising each other on random dates and writing cards with declarations that made anyone who happened to meet them blush. They represented the hope that true relationships still existed, built on dialogue and mutual dedication. At every event in the condominium, they were the first to arrive and the last to leave, always together, always in tune. The connection between the two was evident not only in their intimacy, but also in the way they faced everyday challenges, such as when the health of one of Laura's parents began to require more constant care. Thomas did not hesitate to rearrange his schedule to accompany her to appointments and offer support, showing that marriage was not only about happy moments, but mainly about remaining strong when life showed its cruelest side. Likewise, when Thomas went through a period of tension at work, with threats of cuts to his staff, it was Laura who was there, reminding him daily that he was strong, capable, and worthy of everything he had achieved. This unshakable companionship made it seem as if nothing could knock down the fortress they had built. On nights when the city seemed to conspire with silence, Thomas and Laura would take the opportunity to walk together through the streets lit only by old streetlights, talking about dreams, fears, and even everyday nonsense. These walks were moments of therapy, where their intertwined hands acted as anchors that kept them from losing each other. At these times, the feeling of belonging was so intense that it seemed as if they were both breathing in sync, as if their hearts had decided to beat to the same rhythm forever. This complicity did not go unnoticed even by the strangers they crossed paths with, and it was common for them to receive comments from people who said they were inspired by them to believe that true love still existed. The home they built was also the setting for small traditions that made each day special, notes left on the bathroom mirror with phrases like, "Don't forget to smile today," or, "Proud of who you are," candlelit dinners on dates that marked nothing more than the desire to be together, and songs that became soundtracks to important chapters in their relationship. In every corner of the house, there were traces of the affection that united them, from the pillows they bought together to the souvenirs of trips hung like amulets against any tide that might shake them. To those who observed from the outside, the life they led was proof that love could be eternal when there was true dedication on both sides. In essence, Thomas and Laura seemed to be the perfect definition of companionship, where differences did not separate, but added to, and individual dreams came together to form a single destiny. In every hug, in every late-night conversation, in every glance exchanged, there was the silent promise that nothing could separate them. At least that was what they believed, that was what they made sure to show the world, and, above all, that was what they made themselves believe every time they lay side by side and whispered plans that went far beyond tomorrow. The silence that followed the kiss stole Thomas's breath, turning each heartbeat into a deafening roar. He stopped a few feet away from the couple, feeling as if the ground would collapse at any moment, and watched as they slowly separated, only to meet their eyes, wide with panic. Laura's breathing became irregular, and her face lost color while the man next to her, the boss Thomas had only known from social events, maintained the hard expression of someone who seemed more irritated by the interruption than regretful for the act. In an almost automatic movement, Thomas let out words that came out as sharp as blades, "You destroyed everything we built, I am disappointed with your attitude," and turned to leave, ignoring Laura's trembling hands that tried to touch him and the voice that begged him between sobs for him to stop and listen to her. He didn't look back even when he heard the muffled sound of her falling to her knees, nor when the guests began to whisper, and he walked firmly out of the hall, determined not to let anyone else see the tears that threatened to escape. At home, his fury gave way to a void so deep that even anger seemed incapable of filling it. Thomas walked from room to room, revisiting every corner that held memories of the couple, now tainted by an unforgettable betrayal. The photos on the walls, once a symbol of happiness, became a cruel reminder of a love he began to doubt had ever truly existed. He quickly gathered documents, passports, and belongings that he considered essential, unable to stop his hands from shaking, and left an envelope with the divorce papers on the dining table. Each signature was accompanied by a pang in his chest, as if, with each letter, he was tearing a piece of the heart that he had once offered without hesitation. Hours later, still immersed in the chaos of the restaurant, Laura returned home, not knowing if she would have the courage to face her husband. When she opened the door and saw the house plunged into silence, she found the envelope on the table as if it were a sentence. When she read the cold and formal words, she felt her legs give way and fell to the floor, covering her face with her hands as she burst into uncontrollable tears. Her phone vibrated incessantly with messages from her boss, but the sound sickened her. The shame burned brighter than any desire, and the regret came with the force of a hurricane, destroying all the excuses she had created for herself. In that moment, she understood that there was no going back, that the only person capable of forgiving her would never look at her the same way. Laura's mind filled with happy memories with Thomas, their first apartment, the nights planning children, the mornings when they would hug each other until they were late for work. Each memory hurt like a blade. In the following days, Thomas turned off his phone and disappeared from everywhere he went. Laura tried everything to find him, called friends, visited his work, but the answers were always the same: they didn't know anything or preferred not to get involved. In her desperation, she began sending long voice messages asking for forgiveness, admitting that she had made a mistake, swearing that she could do anything to make things right. But the messages disappeared into the void, and the lack of response was a deafening echo. In a last attempt, she went to his parents' house, believing that she would find him there, but she was met with looks full of disappointment. Without needing words, she understood that her betrayal had spread like wildfire, burning not only her marriage, but also the bridges with everyone who had once respected her. As Laura fell apart, Thomas found refuge in a small town a few hours away, where no one knew his story. There, he began to frequent a cozy cafe that stayed open late, a place where he felt safe to be alone among others. One particularly cold night, as he was leafing through a book he couldn't read, a woman sat at the table next to him and smiled when she noticed the cover. She mentioned that she had read the book a few weeks earlier and had been moved by the story of redemption it contained. Their conversation began shyly, but soon turned to deeper topics, and Thomas discovered that she, too, bore the scars of recent betrayal. The empathy between them grew like a flame in dry straw, and with each meeting, he felt the hole in his chest begin to close. It was during one of these meetings that the woman, with a choked voice, told how her husband had betrayed her with her best friend and how that had made her question her own worth. Thomas, overcome with emotion, told her about his pain, but at no point did he reveal Laura's name. They supported each other, finding in their wounds a way to heal their own souls. Together, they discovered that it was still possible to smile genuinely and that life could offer new opportunities for happiness. Meanwhile, Laura began to live like a ghost, locked in her house, avoiding mirrors and places that could remind her of everything she had lost. She spent the night awake, revisiting every moment of the relationship and wondering how she could have been so blind as to throw away a love that many would beg to have. A few weeks later, when she tried to contact him again, she discovered that Thomas had not only disappeared, but had already filed for the sale of the house and transferred all the assets that could be legally separated. The divorce papers, now with advanced dates, had arrived through lawyers who had no interest in hearing explanations or justifications. Laura begged for a chance to talk in person, but the answers were short and formal. The pain of knowing that she was being completely erased from his life hurt more than any punishment she could imagine. And, in the midst of her suffering, she began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed, old messages in which Thomas spoke of insecurity, looks that showed fear of losing her, and situations in which he asked her, without knowing how, to confirm the love between them. Each memory became a broken mirror, reflecting her guilt for having ignored such clear signs. The secret that had been consuming her so much was revealed when, in a desperate attempt to find him, Laura went to his old company in the hope that he would still be in touch with colleagues. There, she met a close friend of Thomas who, with a serious look and a firm voice, told her that, throughout their relationship, Thomas had struggled with a paralyzing insecurity caused by the abandonment he had suffered in childhood. From a very young age, he had learned to deal with the constant fear of being replaced or not being enough for the person he loved. This fear never stopped him from loving Laura deeply, but it made him dedicate every part of himself to proving himself worthy of her love, even when it was already obvious to everyone that he didn't need to make any effort. The secret was that, while Laura was playing with another man's fire, Thomas had secretly bought 2 tickets to the island where they had spent their honeymoon and planned to take her back to the place where it all began to renew their wedding vows, convinced that by showing her once again how much he loved her, he would dispel any shadow that might hang between them. The revelation was like a bolt of lightning that split Laura in half. The friend showed her the receipt from the travel agency and a letter that Thomas had written, planning to deliver it at the airport, in which he talked about how even with the difficulties they faced, he had never doubted that she was the woman of his life. In the letter, he said that there was no future where she was not there, that every obstacle would be overcome as long as they walked together, and that, more than any professional victory or individual dream, the greatest goal in his life was to make her happy. The pain of this discovery was so intense that Laura found herself unable to remain standing, falling to the ground in the company parking lot while sobbing loudly, feeling the crushing weight of what she had destroyed with her own hands. At that moment, she understood that she had not only lost the man who loved her the most, but also the opportunity to build the story he had dreamed of with such dedication. The certainty that Thomas intended to surprise her with the renewal of their vows made her regret overflow in an overwhelming way, because she realized that, while she was giving herself over to empty encounters in search of fleeting excitement, there was someone on the other side who was silently preparing the greatest proof of love she had ever received. There was nothing else to be done. Thomas continued to rebuild his life, while she found herself condemned to live with the memory of the chance she had thrown away and the love she would never find again in another heart. Laura spent days locked up at home, unable to deal with the reflection of her own face in the mirror, which now showed her only a woman destroyed by her own choices. The words of the letter she never received echoed in her mind every second, hammering like bells of condemnation, the certainty that Thomas planned a future full of love while she tore everything apart with impatient hands and gestures of betrayal. The nights were endless, and the silence of the room seemed to mock her, bringing back memories of when they would fall asleep together exchanging secrets and laughter. The food lost its flavor, her body became weak, and even the perfume she used to love began to make her sick, as each note reminded her of the man who would never return. In a last desperate attempt to remedy the irremediable, she sought out the lawyer who was handling the divorce and asked to personally deliver the last signatures, believing that, face to face, she could beg for a chance to explain everything. The lawyer, with the coldness of someone who knew the story in detail, politely refused, warning that Thomas no longer wanted any contact and that any communication should be made through formal channels. While Laura was drowning in regret, Thomas was taking slow but steady steps to rebuild his life. In his new routine, he found peace in simple activities that had previously gone unnoticed: walks by the lake at dawn, cooking classes to learn how to make recipes he had always dreamed of trying, and afternoons spent reading in quiet libraries. His gaze, once heavy, became lighter as he allowed time to heal his wounds, and in each conversation with the new woman who had entered his life, he realized that there was room to start over without carrying the weight of the past forever. The exchanges between them were sincere, raw, free of masks. Both exposed their pain with the courage of those who had nothing left to lose, and this gave rise to a complicity so genuine that, in a short time, it transformed into real joy. There were kisses still restrained by the insecurity of both, but in these gestures there was also hope, as if each touch said that everything could be different from then on. One night, already wrapped in mutual trust, the woman asked, her voice almost muffled by hesitation, if Thomas still thought about Laura. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question, and answered sincerely that he remembered her every day, but not with longing or a desire to return, but rather like someone remembering a fire that destroyed a house where he was once happy. He confessed that, despite the pain that still throbbed at times, the freedom he had gained was something he would not give up again. She held his hand tightly and said that there was no shame in admitting the scars, because they were proof that they had survived. Her words were like a balm, and for the first time in months, Thomas was able to sleep without confusing dreams, only with the serenity of someone who is beginning to feel at peace with himself. Meanwhile, Laura decided to seek help from a therapist, as the pain that was eating away at her was no longer allowing her to function even in the most basic tasks. Through tears, she recounted in detail everything she had done, the reasons that led her to seek out what she believed she had lost, and discovered that her actions were rooted in fears she didn't even know existed. With each session, the weight of her guilt became clearer, and the awareness that she might not deserve forgiveness made her question whether she would ever truly be able to start over. At night, she would revisit old photos hidden in a box in her closet, feeling the images burn like embers on her skin. In one of them, she saw Thomas kneeling, smiling as he handed her an engagement ring, and she remembered the emotion she had felt at that moment, when they swore never to hurt each other. A few months later, Laura learned from a mutual friend that Thomas had been seen walking hand in hand with a woman at a book fair, both of them laughing like two teenagers just starting out. The news was like a stab in the back of her neck that brought back everything she had missed. She began following them from afar on social media, creating fake profiles to see every photo his friends posted of him. She observed the genuine smiles and the peaceful expressions that no longer existed on her own face. One rainy afternoon, she decided to go to the cafe where she knew he used to spend his mornings, determined to at least see him in person to make sure he was okay. When she entered, she looked for him among the tables, her heart racing, but when she saw him, she realized something that paralyzed her: the sparkle in his eyes no longer existed for her. Thomas saw her, just for a brief second, but he looked away like someone looking at a stranger and went back to focusing on the conversation with the woman next to him. Laura felt her legs tremble and had to hold on to the corner of a table to keep from falling. The feeling of being invisible to someone who had once been her entire world tore her apart from the inside out. She left the cafe quickly, her eyes brimming with tears, and got into her car as the tears flowed uncontrollably. Inside the vehicle, she screamed at the top of her lungs, as if the sound could ease the pain that no longer fit in her chest. That day, she understood that Thomas would never come back, that no apology would be enough to erase what she had done, and that the love she had destroyed had become a past that no longer belonged to her. For days, she was unable to leave the house, she just relived the scene over and over again, tormented by the indifference in his gaze. On the other side, Thomas, even noticing Laura's presence in the cafe, chose not to react. His heart no longer fluttered when he saw her, and the compassion that remained was more for the lost human being than for the woman he had once loved. As he left the cafe with his new companion, he walked along the wet sidewalk, feeling the rain hitting his face as if washing away the last remnants of the past. The woman commented that she loved rainy days because they brought a feeling of new beginnings, and Thomas, smiling, replied that he had also come to like them. The touch of their hands naturally intertwining was living proof that, despite the pain, life always offered new chances to those who allowed themselves to move forward. The following week, Laura decided to write a letter to Thomas, not to ask for another chance, but to thank him for the good years they had had and for the way he had loved her. She admitted every mistake, every moment when she could have chosen loyalty and didn't, and she sincerely hoped that he would be happy with someone who knew how to value his love. He left the letter in their old house, now empty and for sale, along with the keys to the car that was still in his name. As he locked the door for the last time, he caressed the walls like someone saying goodbye to a loved one and left without looking back, knowing that he would never return to that place again. Thomas received the letter a few days later, delivered by a broker who was handling the sale of the property. He read each line in silence, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness, but when he finished, he simply folded the paper carefully and put it away in a drawer, as if recognizing the importance of a closed chapter. He called his new partner and invited her for a walk in the park, eager to continue writing a story that was born without secrets, without lies, only with the lightness he had not experienced for a long time. They walked among the trees, talking about plans and dreams, exchanging kisses that carried silent promises of mutual care. In the months that followed, Laura moved to a small apartment far from the neighborhood where she lived with Thomas. She devoted herself to volunteering, hoping to find purpose and try to forgive herself. The nights were still difficult, but little by little she began to accept that she would have to learn to live with the pain of the choices she had made. Each day that she managed to get out of bed, she felt that perhaps there was a chance to rebuild her dignity, even if she could never recover the love she had wasted. Thomas, for his part, found joy in small things, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the sound of his new partner's laughter, the tranquility of falling asleep peacefully. When the memory of Laura came to mind, there was no longer anger, only the realization that all of this had made him stronger. Thus, life followed its course for both of them, each bearing the marks that time and choices left. Thomas learned that loyalty is a treasure that should only be offered to those who deserve it, while Laura discovered that some betrayals not only destroy relationships, but also the very soul of the one who betrays. And even if the wounds heal, the scars will always be there to remind us that nothing, absolutely nothing, is worth more than true love and respect for those who trust us with their eyes closed. The constant sound of rain in recent weeks seemed to accompany the rhythm of hearts trying to find a new beat amidst the chaos left by the explosion of feelings that marked the end. For Laura, the days began to drag on as if each hour lasted an eternity, and the apartment where she now lived seemed too small to contain so much regret. The white walls, without photos or memories, gave her back only the echo of her own thoughts, and the feeling of having been reduced to a stranger to herself became more intense each morning. She spent hours in front of the window, watching the street below without being able to fix her gaze on anything, as if hoping that, somehow, time would return the opportunities she had lost. Her mind revisited, without rest, the last time she had heard Thomas's voice, trying to understand at what point she had allowed the distance to become so insurmountable. But there was no answer to console her, only the harsh reality that choices have prices and that, sometimes, the bill arrives when it is no longer possible to pay. Meanwhile, Thomas walked along the trails of a park full of ancient trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind, trying to absorb every detail that the simple life had once again offered him. With each step, he experienced the strange mixture of freedom and emptiness, because although he had found peace again, he knew that he had lost something precious that he could not recover. Still, he accepted that life is made of cycles, and that remaining stagnant in a painful past would be as destructive as having been betrayed. He strove to build new memories with those who now walked by his side, allowing himself to open his heart to feelings that he thought he would never be able to feel again. On these walks, they talked about dreams that ranged from trips to faraway places to plans to have a house with a garden, and each conversation strengthened the trust between them needed to move forward. The news about the old house, now in the final stages of sale, reached Laura through her lawyer, who sent her the documents to end any legal ties that still existed between them. As she read the papers, her hands trembled as if they were holding glowing embers, for it symbolized the last link being broken with the man who had been her rock for so many years. She signed the papers with tears streaming silently, remembering every detail of the house, the smell of the coffee he made on Sundays, the plants they cared for together, the sound of his laughter echoing through the hallway. The certainty that she would never again be able to walk through those rooms as his wife tore her apart from the inside out, but deep down she knew that she could not expect any other outcome after everything she had done. Thomas, on the other hand, received the documents in hand and, unlike what he imagined, he didn't feel his chest tighten or his eyes fill with tears. He just took a deep breath, with the serenity of someone who had finally seen the bonds being undone. He allowed himself to sit on a bench in a nearby square, watching children playing in couples walking hand in hand, reflecting on how, no matter how dark the night, dawn always brings a light capable of illuminating even the most wounded hearts. When he remembered Laura, he didn't feel hatred, just a distant melancholy, like someone remembering a book they read in their youth and that, despite having had a profound impact on them, is no longer part of who they have become. With a clear mind, he sent a short message to the broker, authorizing the closing of the house deal and thanking him for taking care of the details. As life moved forward for both of them, Laura found herself faced with a dilemma she had never imagined facing. Even though she recognized that her actions had put her in a position of discredit, she could not accept living without trying to redeem herself. In therapy, she shared her fear of never being able to build a new story that was not tainted by the guilt and shame that accompanied her. The therapist, who was a patient, reminded her that sincere repentance is only the first step in a long journey of reconstruction, and that true forgiveness begins with oneself. But even so, questions circled her mind like birds of prey. How could she live in peace knowing that she had destroyed the only true love she had ever had? How could she find dignity when she had become the very example of what she had sworn she would never be? The sessions became increasingly intense, revealing old wounds that she had never confronted, showing that the betrayal had not arisen out of nowhere, but rather from deficiencies that she had never learned to deal with in a healthy way. Thomas, in turn, was deepening his relationship with the woman he had met when he was starting over. Together, they discovered simple pleasures, such as cooking new recipes, visiting museums, or simply spending hours talking about books and movies. He began to share memories of his childhood, stories he had never had the courage to tell anyone, and with each confession, he realized that there was someone willing to listen to him without judgment. This new connection strengthened in his heart the certainty that love is not limited to a single chance and that, even after being hurt so deeply, it was still possible to make room for trust to blossom again. At night, when they lay side by side, he found himself smiling as he remembered that, at some point in the past, he believed that he would never feel safe to love again. The following weeks brought new challenges for Laura, who began to suffer the social consequences of her actions. Mutual friends stopped responding to her messages, previously close co-workers began to treat her with indifference, and even family members showed difficulty trusting her words. Each door that closed seemed like a cruel reminder of how choices can echo far beyond one's own feelings, reaching and pushing away people who had nothing to do with the betrayal. For her, each small gesture of rejection was like a nail driving the pain into her chest, showing her that it was not enough to be sorry, she had to learn to live with the consequences. The forced isolation made her reflect on how a thoughtless attitude can destroy not only a life, but all the connections that supported who one is. While Laura was facing the weight of the contempt she had suffered, Thomas was preparing to receive a visit from his parents, who, despite living far away, decided to meet him in his new home and meet the woman who had helped him get back on his feet. Seeing his mother's proud smile and his father's emotional gaze, Thomas realized that it wasn't just him who needed healing, his family also carried the fear of seeing him suffer again. The warm welcome they offered to his new partner filled the house with laughter and lightness, and the night ended with tight hugs that sealed a new chapter not only for Thomas, but for everyone who loved him. In this welcoming environment, he felt whole in a way he hadn't felt in a long time, and the confirmation that he was on the right path strengthened his heart. However, even with so many signs of overcoming, Thomas couldn't help but reflect on how everything could have been different if they had found the strength to talk before the emotional distance became an abyss. In conversations with his new partner, he shared this view honestly, and together they discussed how important it is to cultivate daily communication in a relationship so that wounds don't accumulate to the point of exploding into tragedies. This awareness made them both strive to always keep the dialogue open, talking about fears and dreams, transforming each small vulnerability into a bridge to greater complicity. In these conversations, they realized that, more than love, it was essential to feel heard and respected. Laura, in turn, began volunteering at an institution that helped women in situations of violence and abandonment, in the hope that, through caring for others, she could also heal herself. In each story she heard, she found echoes of her own pain and discovered that, although the circumstances were different, the essence of loneliness and hopelessness was the same. Contact with these women gave her a sense of purpose that began to fill the emptiness that consumed her days, even though, when she lay down alone, the memories insisted on returning. She began to write letters that she would never send to Thomas, letters in which she confessed regrets, recalled good times and recorded what she had learned from the tragedy she had caused. Writing became a nightly ritual that, although painful, brought relief. Over time, Thomas and his new partner decided to rent a larger house near a forest to start their life together in an environment that symbolized a new beginning. The move was celebrated with a small party for close friends and family, where they toasted not only their new home, but also their courage to love again after everything they had been through. The walls of the house began to be filled with photos of their first outings, memories of short trips they took to places they discovered by chance, and objects chosen together, which represented the construction of a story that belonged only to the two of them. Every corner of that house was marked by sincere conversations, laughter, and promises to never repeat the mistakes of the past. In this scenario, Laura and Thomas's narratives grew increasingly distant, like rivers that once crossed but now flowed in opposite directions. And even though their lives no longer intersected, the consequences of what they had experienced would remain as invisible tattoos on their souls. The pain of betrayal, the courage to start over, and the learning about the importance of preserving trust would be eternal lessons, reminders that true love does not survive where there is no respect. While Thomas's new life was consolidating, Laura found strength in the small victories of everyday life, like when she was able to laugh genuinely with a fellow volunteer or when she was able to sleep a whole night without being tormented by memories. Between encounters and disagreements, both began to carry with them the moral dilemma that would forever mark their trajectories: is it possible to truly forgive someone who destroyed your faith in love? And, on the other hand, how do you rebuild your own essence after betraying the person who trusted you the most? These questions would echo in their hearts as reminders that choices define not only the paths we follow, but also the people we become. The routine in Thomas's new home became a living reflection of the rebirth he had sought so much. The birdsong at dawn filled the hallways with soft notes that seemed to wash away the last traces of pain, and each morning began with the breeze coming in through the large windows that he and his new partner made a point of keeping open. The two developed a daily ritual of walking among the trees in the nearby woods, talking about small achievements from the previous day or simply enjoying the silent company that said more than words could express. Some days, they would stop to prepare improvised picnics on the damp grass, spreading out a blanket and letting time pass slowly, as if this was all life was, the chance to be at peace, next to someone who saw their weaknesses without turning them into weapons. Meanwhile, Laura finally gathered the courage to start over in a more practical way. She looked for a steady job at a small bookstore downtown, where she began to dedicate herself to organizing shelves, suggesting titles to curious readers, and even leading reading circles for children. Daily contact with books brought her a kind of comfort, because she felt that each page she read or tidied was a reminder that stories can always have twists and turns, that characters make mistakes and redeem themselves, even if they don't always end the way they would like. In each smiling face of those who left the bookstore satisfied, she found a breath of hope that, despite what she had lost, she could still offer something good to the world. It was on one of those afternoons, while she was helping a mother and her daughter, that she felt a spontaneous laugh escape her lips for the first time in a long time, and, to her surprise, she almost got emotional when she realized that there was still life inside her. The moral dilemma, however, continued to haunt her in the early hours of the morning, when, lying on her simple mattress, her thoughts dragged her to the past as if each memory were a thorn. One cold night, she decided to write another letter, this time not to Thomas, but to herself, as an exercise her therapist had suggested. On the paper, she confessed everything she had never had the courage to admit out loud, that she had always believed she was not enough, that she sought confirmation of her own worth in the desire of others, but that deep down she knew she was destroying herself with every hug that was not from the person she truly loved. She wrote about how she now saw how unfair she had been not only to Thomas, but to herself, and about the suffocating feeling of having wasted a love that could have been eternal. She ended the letter wishing that, in some future life, she could be someone better, someone capable of protecting and valuing those who offered her their whole heart. On the other side, Thomas experienced the tranquility of a home where trust flourished every day. On a lazy Sunday afternoon, he and his new partner decided to cook together a dish they had never made before. The kitchen was filled with the sweet and sour aroma of spices, and between laughter, pots and pans and pinches of seasoning, they discovered that even mistakes, like burnt rice, could be funny and bring even closer those who were willing to share mistakes and successes without fear. When dinner was finally ready, they sat at the table lit only by the soft light of candles, toasted the life they had built with so much care and exchanged glances that conveyed the security that Thomas had not felt for a long time. The conversations that night flowed freely, covering topics ranging from plans for the future to childhood memories, and before they knew it, dawn was already falling, but sleep seemed impossible given so much complicity. Between these two worlds that were moving in opposite directions, the consequences of the past continued to manifest themselves. Laura began to receive financial demands related to expenses that had been left unpaid during the divorce proceedings, bills that she had never imagined would return as ghosts to remind her of what she had lost. Each collection call was another blow to her conscience, but it also served as a push to move forward, seeking to organize her life in a more responsible way. She decided to sell the car that she had in her name to pay off part of her debts and, for the first time, she felt proud of herself for making decisions to solve her own problems, without waiting for someone to come and rescue her. The pride was small, fragile, but true, and it drove her to believe that one day she would feel worthy again. Meanwhile, Thomas, during his nightly walks to unwind after exhausting days at work, would pass by places he used to frequent with Laura. He didn't look away, but he didn't let memories hold him back either. He simply recognized that those scenes belonged to another time and moved on, determined to build new memories in the places he discovered from then on. On one of those nights, he stopped in front of an old bakery that still sold the bread he used to buy on Sundays and, instead of giving in to nostalgia, he went in, bought 2 loaves of bread and went home. When he arrived, his partner greeted him with a warm smile and joked that he was late, and as they shared the improvised snack, Thomas understood that time does not erase what has been experienced, but teaches that it is possible to write different stories on pages that are still blank. Laura, in turn, began to keep in touch with women she met through her volunteer work, forming bonds of friendship that began to fill the void left by the absence of people who had moved away. The nightly conversations with these new friends, full of confessions and sincere exchanges, reminded her that pain is not exclusive to anyone and that everyone has silent battles that shape who we are. Between shy laughter and shared tears, she began to see herself with more compassion, understanding that, although she could never change the past, she could at least change who she would be from then on. By helping other women to get back on their feet from difficult situations, she realized that, with each word of encouragement she offered, she also strengthened her own legs to walk. During this time, Thomas's new partner also revealed her own emotional scars, recounting how a previous abusive relationship had nearly convinced her that she would never deserve true love. The story brought tears to Thomas's eyes, and he hugged her tightly, promising that together they would heal each other's wounds. This silent commitment only strengthened their bond, knowing that by opening up their wounds, they were building a solid foundation on which trust could be built as an unshakable foundation. In the days that followed, each display of affection, from the notes left on the table to the kisses before work, worked like carefully placed bricks to build a home where they both felt safe. However, despite the small daily achievements, Laura could not shake off the need to know how Thomas was doing. Every now and then, she found excuses to ask mutual friends, hoping to hear that he was unhappy or regretted leaving, but the answers always dismantled her expectations. She discovered that he was fine, that he remained focused on work, that he was making plans with his new partner and, above all, that he seemed at peace. Each piece of information hit her like a new stab in the back of her neck, but it also served as a cruel reminder that there was no room for her in his life. At those times, she wondered if she would ever be able to move on without having to feed on news about someone who was no longer part of his present. On the other hand, Thomas, in deep conversations with his new partner, reflected on the importance of recognizing the signs that may indicate the beginning of a distance in a relationship. Together they discussed strategies to prevent problems from becoming walls, agreeing that whenever something bothered them, no matter how small, they would share it immediately. This attitude transformed discussions into opportunities for growth, instead of chasms. The complicity that emerged from these conversations reinforced the certainty that both wanted to build a story based on dialogue and respect, where there would be no room for lies or corrosive silences. One Saturday afternoon, Laura sat on the floor of her small apartment, surrounded by boxes she hadn't yet had the courage to unpack. She decided to open each one, to face memories that had been kept like ghosts that prevented her from living. Among the old papers, she found a photo album she had put together for their first wedding anniversary. She spent hours leafing through it, touching with trembling fingers each image that captured smiles so genuine they almost hurt. Each page she turned was a deep dive into memories that confirmed how happy she had once been with Thomas, but also revealed the insurmountable distance she had created. At the end of the night, she delicately closed the album and decided to donate it to an institution that reused photographic materials for artistic projects, as a symbolic way of freeing herself from the emotional prison that her past had become. Thomas's new routine was punctuated by moments of tranquility that he had learned to value more than anything. On Fridays, they would turn the living room into a makeshift movie theater, spreading pillows on the floor, making popcorn, and watching old movies. On those nights, he felt that every smile they exchanged, every loving look, was a promise that they could weather any storm as long as they remained united. There was no longer room for the fear of betrayal or for the scars of the past to dominate their emotions, there was only complete surrender to a present built on mutual trust. Amidst the twists and turns that life had in store, both went in directions as far apart as their new choices allowed, but each step reaffirmed the importance of respect, communication and honesty as pillars for any relationship that aspires to eternity. On that clear morning, Thomas woke up to the sound of birds and the gentle rustling of leaves in the forest, but it wasn't just the natural music that made him smile peacefully, but rather the undeniable feeling of belonging. He finally felt whole, at peace with his choices and confident in the love he cultivated alongside the person he now called home. He and his partner had decided to make their union official with an intimate ceremony for family and a few friends, marked not by luxury, but by the intensity of the feeling that overflowed between them. The chosen location was a garden surrounded by ancient trees, whose wide trunks seemed like silent guardians of each promise made in whispers. The moment they exchanged their vows, Thomas felt that every scar in his heart found rest, because the eyes that looked at him from across the altar were those of someone who would never transform insecurity into betrayal, but rather into affection and understanding, building together with him a tomorrow different from the one that had been interrupted so long ago. While Thomas celebrated the possibility of rebuilding his life, Laura woke up in an apartment that still carried the smell of the coffee she had started to prepare in silence. The sound of the alarm clock echoed like a cold bell, reminding her that another day was beginning and that loneliness remained a constant companion. Each step down the narrow hallway of the apartment echoed memories that still throbbed like open wounds. She tried to fill the void with the routine of her work at the bookstore, but when she returned home, the silence was so deafening that it almost hurt. On a particularly difficult night, she decided to open her cell phone to look at photos of friends who were moving on with their lives without her. Among images of smiles, weddings and dates, she realized how far she had distanced herself from everything that represented human warmth. She cried softly, leaning over the kitchen table, as if she understood that there was no chance of going back, and that all that was left was to move forward, aware that you can't have everything again when you destroy what is essential. In the months that followed, Laura was laid off from the bookstore amid staff cuts, and the news hit her like another blow from reality. Desperate, she tried to find other opportunities, but the few interviews she managed to schedule ended in rejections that reinforced the weight of her unresolved story. Her reputation, still marked by rumors circulating among acquaintances, made every attempt to start over more difficult. Her money was running out, and she had to sell personal belongings to pay the most basic bills. Soon, visits to her therapist became luxuries she could no longer afford, and, alone, she began to face the nights without any professional support, facing only her own conscience as the relentless judge of each mistake she made. While Laura sank into regrets that piled up like stones tied to her feet, Thomas and his new wife enjoyed a honeymoon in a place where the sea met the mountains in shades of blue and green so intense they seemed unreal. In the warmth of the sun on their skin and the sound of the waves gently breaking on the deserted beach, they built memories that would become eternal memories, free from ghosts of the past. Each touch, each kiss, was sealed by the newly gained trust, and in the conversations that took place by the sea, they made promises that they would never let silence or pride create barriers between them. In Thomas's eyes, there was the shine of someone who, even having fallen into an abyss of pain, had found the strength to get up and build a path even more beautiful than the one he had lost. Laura, in turn, after weeks of failed attempts to relocate, found herself on the verge of despair when she received an eviction notice for late rent. She packed up what little she had left of her belongings and called the only person who still responded to her messages, an old volunteer colleague. Humiliated, she asked for temporary shelter and promised to help with the housework as a way of showing her gratitude. The colleague, even though surprised to see her so dejected, offered her a small room in the back of the house, where Laura began to sleep on a makeshift mattress, surrounded by boxes that held the last memories of what had once been her seemingly perfect life. Each night in that space made her reflect on how everything she had achieved, built over years of effort and love from Thomas, had been torn apart in an instant by thoughtless choices. Meanwhile, upon returning from his trip, Thomas was welcomed into his new home with flowers sent by friends who celebrated his happiness, and every detail of the space reminded him that, even after so much suffering, he had managed to write another story. Recent photos were hung on the walls with sincere smiles, and the house exuded the scent of someone who cultivates joy in every corner. During dinners for two, the topics of conversation revolved around plans for the future, such as the possibility of adopting a child or building their own business together, ideas that were born from the desire to share not only the present, but also every dream they still had. With each plan, they felt strengthened, because they knew that the foundation they were building was made of respect, empathy, and true love. One gray afternoon, while tidying up her small room, Laura received an unexpected message from an old number. It was from her former boss, the same one with whom she had destroyed her marriage. He said he was sorry, but the message made it clear that his intentions were nothing more than selfish interests. For the first time, Laura felt repulsed, deleted the contact and blocked him, realizing that she would never find redemption by repeating her mistakes. This action, although small, brought a sense of relief. She felt that perhaps she still had the strength to change, but now she had to learn to live with the certainty that some consequences would be permanent, like scars that would never completely disappear. At home, Thomas and his wife decided to throw a small party to celebrate 6 months of marriage. They invited only those who had been part of their healing process, and the evening was filled with laughter, good food, and hugs that reaffirmed how valuable it is to be surrounded by people who truly want the best for you. Amidst a toast, Thomas looked around and felt a silent pride for having come this far, for having transformed pain into strength and learned that true love is not made of empty promises, but of daily actions that nurture trust. And as he danced hand in hand with his wife to the sound of soft music, he understood that complete happiness did not lie in never having fallen, but in knowing how to get back up with dignity and courage. The moral of this story is as clear as the sunrise after a storm: betrayal, even if it seems momentarily exciting or necessary, has the power to devastate lives, destroy homes and shatter dreams that were built with love and patience. Forgiveness is noble, but it is not mandatory, and those who make mistakes do not always have the chance to reverse the consequences of their actions. Therefore, value every gesture, every word and every moment with those who trust you, because once broken, trust is difficult to recover, and the pain caused can echo throughout life. Always remember, our channel does not support any form of betrayal, and our stories are fictional, created to show how thoughtless decisions can have devastating consequences. Subscribe for more stories like this and leave your opinion in the comments. What did you think of this outcome? Do you believe Laura deserved a second chance, or was Thomas right to move on? We want to hear your opinion.